Hello all, welcome back to another session. So in this session, let's try to understand about a relevant of this. So let me go to this thing. So let's have this thing. Let's have a small recap of what are the things that we have learned in the previous session. Give me a minute. Let me share my screen. Right. So in the previous session, we have learned about something like three important things. Specifically, if you look at these three things, and in today's session, we'll be focusing upon one simple thing, which is nothing but I can say this in objects. I can say um this in methods, this, sorry, and I'll say sorry, this is not bound, and arrow functions arrow functions have no this. So we'll only focus upon the important element known as this, specifically when we are dealing with this respective thing known as a this. What is meant by this? Let's try to understand this important, very important topic. Let me create this file and I'll say this.js. This.js, fine. Let me close all of the other things. So generally what we actually understood is objects are usually created to represent entities of real world. Entities of real world. So for example, we'll say let user is equal to something like name. We'll mention the user details like age 25 and such sort of a thing. That would be sufficient. Let's make this very simple and straightforward. And in a real world, a user can act. For example, let's mention actions that can be performed by user. Specifically, we can say shopping cart. We have this thing known as a login. We have this logout, etc. Logout. So coming back to this given particular thing, always remember this one fundamental important point. Actions in JavaScript are represented by functions in properties. I repeat, actions are represented in JavaScript. Let me be more precise. Maybe this might sound a different meaning if I didn't use a proper grammar. Actions are represented in JS by functions in properties. Functions in properties, which is I think what one very important thing we need to mention. If you try to understand functions in properties, when we are dealing with object, we know that the properties are key value pairs. Properties are key value pairs. But here, as we have seen in previous examples also, in a property, key is the name of the property. Let me write it. Key is the name of the property. Value is the data of the property. Value is the data of the property. This is the basic thing that we have agreed upon. And one very important thing is objects are not primitive. Or instead of not primitive, I can say non-primitive. What exactly is meant by this respective thing known as a non-primitive? Where in a given object, we can store multiple data types. Multiple data types. So here I have stored a string, a number. Even if I want to store any other thing, I can do it. But what if, let me write it here. What if we want that object to perform some actions. Some actions. Because at the end of the day, why we are actually learning about this entire objects part is specifically when we are going to deal with a unique thing. Let's say not a unique thing, but when we are going to deal with mm, a real world example. So while building a real world example or real world web page where each user is or each user's data is stored in an object, and the same object should be or same object will be considered as the user itself. The user itself. So whatever the actions can be, yeah, whatever the actions can be done or can be done by user should be assigned, or I can say should be assigned to the object of that particular user. So here, this actions, whatever we are talking about, these actions, how can we create an action specifically? Always remember the things that we have discussed about this thing known as an functions. Always remember functions are key examples of actions. Whenever you want to do, when you're building any kind of an web page, whenever you want to include some actionable items, then you write functions for it. Whenever you want to store data, we create variables. But whenever you want to perform any kind of actions, we create functions, specifically in JavaScript or in any other programming language also altogether. So in order to create actions, what we have to do is we need to create functions. Functions as a properties in a given particular user page. So we can simply say like this. I'll say hi. I can simply write, or instead of making this thing like this, so what I can do is I can add user dot say hi is equal to function of, I'll say console dot log hi. Hi. So in below code, we are adding a new property to the above object user. So the key for the property is say hi, and data that we are going to store, that we store inside the key, or data we going to yeah, inside the key is a function. As I've already told, whenever you want to mention any kind of a action, you write a function. So here I have created a thing. Now let me first console log. You'll see what are the things that you'll observe. So I'll say node this dot this. Now if you can clearly observe, the property that we have for this user object is name, age, and we have this something known as say hi, where we have recently added. Once this added is done, now in this given particular property, where the key value is hi, say hi, and coming back to the another important thing, the function that we are attaching is anonymous. But if you can clearly observe, after this function keyword, I don't have any kind of name. That's why this entire thing is known as anonymous function, right? So if I say this given particular thing, if I want to execute, because In this property, say hi. If I say user.name, user.name, I'll be getting the result like this. Let me run the code. You'll see the output is written. Whenever I'm trying to access user.name, which is I'm trying to access the property of name. If I say something like age, run the code, you'll see that we are trying to access this given particular property, age, and we are getting the respective data that is assigned to it. Similarly, what if I want to access or if I want to execute this given particular thing as a function? Because the say hi property is storing some function inside it, right? So if I say hi, let's check whether this works or not. Now you can clearly see it is clearly saying, okay, in this respective key, we have this a function, we have an anonymous function altogether. So what we can do if we want to execute the function that is stored inside this key, which is this, if you want to execute this function which is stored inside this given particular key, then you have to use this thing. Then you have to use this brackets, open brackets. Then whatever function that is present inside this say hi property or key, then that will be executed. Right now you can clearly see node this.js. Now I'm saying console.log hi. You got hi. And second thing is undefined, because in this function we are not returning anything. So if you simply return, you simply return, you still see there is an undefined. So return something, return 0, and let's see what is the output. I can clearly see hi and 0. So if you don't return any kind of a thing, then it's fine. It shows you something like the output, the function will be executed, which is nothing but this console log will be executed, and there is no return statement. That's why we are getting undefined here as a result. Undefined here as a result. So whatever thing that we are doing here, this entire thing, let me write it in the comment below. Adding functions to the properties for an object is called as methods. So this respective this entire function where it is a value for this respective key, and these both are key value pairs, which is nothing but a property for this object. So in a given object, when we try to add any kind of a function as a property, then those functions are actually known as methods. That's what I have written here. Adding functions to the properties for an object are called methods. Are called methods. Right? So if you can clearly observe, our user, our user name is Nitin. Our user age is 25. The actions that sorry. Give me a minute. Right. Let's get back. Yeah. Yeah. So adding functions to the respective properties for an object are called as methods. Because you can clearly see the username, age, the details we know, but we can now clearly say that a user can perform this action. So similarly, you can do this one thing. You'll say user dot add to cart. We'll simply write functions, and you can write code for making user to add the item to the cart. So whenever we are adding any kind of actions where users can, for example, when you go to e-commerce website where users can add their own their products they want to buy to the cart. So users can add to cart or they can perform this given particular option. That's why I have written it in the format of function. I haven't written the logic, but still I am telling you the gist of this entire thing. Gist of this one very entire thing altogether. So this is how this entire thing actually happens. Now, one very important thing we need to understand is, right, when we write our code using objects to represent entities, always remember objects are used to represent entities. Always remember, objects are used whenever you're writing code. We use objects to represent entities. What is meant by entities? That is remember real world entities like user, like something known as what do we call? We'll sometimes call it as shop. The shopping cart and all of these things. All of these things are real world entities, and if you want to deal with these things, we are going to write or we are going to mention all of them into a one single element known as object. A simple thing. A simple thing. Because we need to understand why we are actually learning about these objects. Because the fundamental thing is, if you want to implement any real world feature into the programming thing, you do require this one very important thing known as an objects. Now, when you try to represent any kind of an entities with objects, then that style, that's called object oriented programming, which is in short actually known as OOP. So this is very a big thing and an interesting science of its own. How to choose the right entities, how to organize the interaction between them. That's architecture, and there are like very great books on this respective topics. So one such book is actually known as Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object Oriented Software. This is one such a very good book. And second book was Object Oriented Analysis and Design with Applications. These are very very good books. If you want to go ahead, you can just bring it up and you can learn about this respective things. Now coming back to the second important thing. So we have seen how do we actually write our respective things, but um, what we can do is mm, right, instead of writing this code like this, instead of writing the code like this, let me comment it down. Let me comment it down. Let me comment this thing also, or let me uh, yeah, comment it down. Let's use a similar example. Let's try to add a method to this respect to object. How do we actually add method to it? So I'll say hi. I'll write the same code. So you'll simply mention this thing as console.log hi. Console.log hi. So this is how we actually write the respective right. So exactly this is how we actually can represent our respective method like this. This is completely fine. This is basically the correct way to write a method for any given particular object. Then there is this one very important thing known as an method shorthand. Method shorthand. So the example of this method shorthand is instead of writing these bulk methods, we can actually reduce this entire thing. We can actually uh, reduce this entire thing where this method shorthand looks better. This method shorthand looks better. So I'll say, mm, mm, let it be. Okay, this is a method, and I'll say user is equals to say hi, and you write a normal function console.log or hi. Sorry. Now, if you can clearly observe the difference between these two things, let me write it. Right, no problem. So this is a standard way of writing methods in a respective given particular object. The second one would be, and writing this entire thing where you can clearly observe the main difference between this standard way and this method shorthand is you can remove this function or the keyword function can be removed. Just write the function name and give it like this. But majority of the programmers prefer this way because this is more clear and straightforward. Some people who are new to the code might be confusing with this respect to shorthand notations altogether. So one must be very careful while following these standards. But it is better to go ahead with this standard because majority of the programming world will be going to this one thing. But this is also fine. But this is a method shorthand format altogether, right? Now comes to this main part, which is known as this. So what is meant by respect to thing known as a this? So this one very important thing is very crucial while learning about this entire concept of objects. How can we manipulate this object? How can we do these respective things? All these things can be managed by this one single element, right? So let's try to understand the cruciality of this one very important thing known as this. So, um, okay, let's understand this. Before understanding this, I just need to make one single important thing, or I just want to mention one very simple important thing that I want to tell. I can simply say it's maybe you can say it's common that an object method needs to access the information stored in the object to do its job. Sorry, its job, right? That, like for instance, there is this given particular code that we have written, like user dot say hi. Where is this line? Yes, user dot say hi. So may need the name of user. If you can clearly observe, let's say we have one single method. If we have one single method, let's assume in a complex object we'll be having multiple hundreds of methods. Then at that point of time, instead of calling it as user dot with that method name, with that method name, what if we can access? Let me write it. Uh, what if? Sorry. What if we can access the object? Um, a method that can use the this keyword, this keyword altogether, this keyword, which is nothing but here. If you can clearly observe, let me represent. Let me so let me do this one thing. Um, uh, do this one thing. Let's say user is also not that right. All right. Let's say we have this function, this entire thing. Um, Instead of having this thing, hi from, let me remodify my things. If I say user dot name, let's see what will be the output for this thing. Console dot log user dot say hi, this function. If that is the case, I can clearly see hi from Nathan, hi from Nathan. But instead of writing at user dot name, if I can say this, so now here this is a one such a keyword where it represents the current object, where it represents the current object, where it represents the current object. So now if I run the code, I can clearly see it is clearly mentioning that this in this context is focusing or is representing the current object in which it is present in, the current object in which it is present in. So the value of this in this respective scenario, where before this dot, that one used to call the method, that one used to call the method. So to access the object, to access this object, the current object or the object to be more specific, a method can use. Similarly, this is a method. This can actually use this keyword. This can actually use this keyword altogether. So the value that is assigned with for this given particular keyword is object before dot. Is object before dot. So let me write it like this. This is the current object. This is the current object altogether. This is the current object altogether. I think you can remove this console log. Let me give me a minute. Right. Now still right. Now still this works fine. Now still this works fine. This still works fine. Right. So here coming back to this thing during the execution, this represents this. This represents this. This is how this will associate. Here how this will be associated. So the possibility is like, let me write this one very important format. Technically, it's possible to access the object without this keyword by referencing, sorry, by referencing it via outer variable. So instead, we can have this same code, the above same code. We can simply say it. We have this. Okay, let me close it up. Instead of having this, let's remove all of it. Instead of using this, we can use user. So one very important thing we need to understand is, for this context of say hi function, it is possible to access the object without this. Even if you can clearly observe, in this function, I am not at all using this keyword to access the object, because this function, I repeat, for this context of this function, this user is an outer variable. Is user is an outer variable altogether. Give me a minute. Yeah. This user is an outer variable. So technically, outer variables can be, or global variables can be included or can be utilized inside of any function. The same logic that I am also implementing. The same logic that I am also, uh, implementing. But there is a problem with this thing. You might be asking, Nitin, sorry, we can access this user outer variable in the function itself. Then why do we want this, or the keyword, or this keyword, or this specific keyword known as this? Why do we want it? So the above code that currently I have given you here, here. So let me write it. User instead of this. This is what I have used here, specifically in this context. Now, the major problem with this given particular code is, let me write it like below. But the above code, wait, the above code is unreliable. Is unreliable. Like if we decide to copy user to another variable. For example, if I say admin, let admin is equal to user. Let admin is equal to user. If I do such kind of things and overwrite, we keep it like this. Overwrite. Not this. Overwrite user with something else. Then it will access the wrong object. Then it will access the wrong object. For example, let me show you a basic example. Let me take you this example. Will this example work or not? Um, mm, Let me copy it. Let me comment it down. Mm, Let me use it here. I'll say let admin is equal to user, and I'll say user is equal to null. If I do some kind of a changes like this, so, and I'll say admin dot say hi. Say admin dot say hi. Whenever I try to do it, not this. Now it is clearly mentioning cannot read properties of null. Cannot read properties of null, because we have clearly mentioned, as this above code, when we are dealing with this given button, it is unreliable. Like if we decide to copy user to another variable, like we have did for this and overwrite the user variable with something else, with something else, then it will access the wrong object. Then it will access the wrong object because here, whenever we are saying this thing, we are actually copied our user thing into admin. That's what we are doing. The addresses have been added, but all of a sudden we are making our overwriting user. Then at this point of time, because this is still user, this is still user because when this happens, when 84 line happens, the below code should happen. When 84 line happens, then it should be admin is equals to, I'll say name should be Nitin, age should be 25, and we also want to have this thing known as say hi. Not this. Me focus it. Give me a minute. So this is how it is happening. Let me copy this line. Right. So when this 84 line happens, this is how your code will be. This is how your code will look like. Let me. Right. This is how your code look like. Now, whenever you say admin dot say hi, where now user has become value of null, but still it is trying to access user dot name. So whenever you say, whenever you call this function, it will say, it will try to access as null dot name. So whenever it try to access a null element, it says cannot read the properties of null. It's a type error. It's a type error. That's why we don't follow this given particular method. We follow using this keyword. This keyword. It is as much as that important. Is as much as that important. Let me comment it down. And what are the things? Other things are bound. What are the things? This is not bound. Fine. This is not bound. This is not at all bound. Now, what is meant by this thing? I can say in JavaScript specifically, keyword this, the keyword this behaves unlike most other programming languages, because in other programming languages we also have this facility of dealing with the respective thing known as an I know this in other programming languages, but in JavaScript it is bit different, right? So let's go back to our thing. Give me a minute. Uh, it's fine. Programming language. Just give me a minute. It's a bit going in my system. Right. So let's get back to this thing. Let's clear it out and yeah. So where are we? Yes. So this, I mean, it. Sorry. Uh, it can be used in any function. Like specifically, we can use it. You can use the keyword this in any function, even if it's not a method of an object. That's how this thing. For example, let me write it. Function say hi. And I'll simply say console.log this dot name. If it is something like this dot name. Now here the value of this. the keyword, specifically the value of this um, is evaluated, to be more precise, is evaluated during the runtime. Specifically, this entire evaluation part is actually being taken care by this respect to one single element known as this, but the internal JavaScript internals have some few different kind of rules specifically for this keyword. So depending on this one very important thing known as context, depending on the context specifically. For example, let me consider this thing like this. Mm, So let me do this one thing. Um, let's copy it. Save it. Mm, Now let's create two objects. Let user is equal to some name. Let's go with Akhil, and something known as admin is equal to, we have this name to be admin, for example. For the use case purpose, let's go ahead with these respective examples. And let's say we have these respective function. We have this respective thing known as a simple function like this. A simple function like this. Say dot hi. I'll say admin dot f. Let's create a new property known as f. And in that, let me store this function hi. And I'll say user dot f is equal to, let's try to have this value. So we are using the same function in two objects for this property named as f, for the property named as f. Now, one very important thing is these calls have different this different values for this, to be more precise, and values for this specifically like this. Now I need to importantly tell this one thing. This inside the function is the object before dot, before dot. For example, say user dot f off, the output here would be, because here output would be something like Akhil, something like Akhil. As why? Reason is very simple. Here this is actually equal to uh, user, not admin. If I say admin dot f, the output here would be something like this, admin. And we have this one thing known as here, this value is actually equal to admin. This is not admin, it's admin. It's admin. It's admin. Now similarly, one very important thing we can understand is if I want to call this thing in braces, I'll be using like this. I'll be using my square braces like it. So whenever you are using square braces, whatever property you want to call, you should keep in strings and you can call it. Now here also we have this thing admin as an output. So one very important thing we need to understand is here this inside this function is the object before the dot, but these different calls, because admin this call and this call have different values of this. So the simple rule is, let me explain. The simple rule is if object dot any method is being called is being called, then the keyword this is object during the call, during the call of f method. F method. This is a straightforward. This is a straightforward thing. This is a very straightforward thing. So here in this case, if it is object, here this would be user, here this would be admin altogether. admin altogether. So another final thing that I want to mention is uh, arrow functions. Arrow functions have no this, like no the keyword this, focus on that thing. So I can say we have this user. Let me let me do let's do this comment. Let's try with the example. Let user is actually equal to, I'll say first name to be something like Nathan, and second important thing I'll just go ahead and focus on. Let's do this thing. I'll say hi is a function. Mm, I'll write an arrow function. Let arrow is equal to, and I'll simply say console.log this dot first name, to be more precise. This dot first name. This is dot first name. So instead of writing it in a single line, I can write it in like this multiple lines. I can write it here. I can write it like this. This is an arrow function, but anyways, this method or the previous one, anything works fine. If the code is in single line, I can mention it in a single line altogether. Then I'll have this arrow as this. Now coming back to this outer code, if I say user dot say hi, if I call it, you'll go ahead and you'll see this thing as nothing. You see this thing as nothing. So one very important thing we need to understand here is arrow functions uh, are special as they don't have own this. They don't have own this. Like if we reference this from such function, from such arrow functions, I repeat, from such arrow functions, it's taken, it's taken from the outer normal function. Outer normal function. So for this given particular thing, here we have this inside this some arrow functions altogether, right? There is this special feature about where here this focuses upon this focus upon not this object. It actually focuses on outer context. So beyond this thing. For example, let me keep it like this. Let me keep it in a thing. As we have previously seen in different examples, whenever we have this, whenever we have this, it goes and focus on outer, just outer point. But here, this doesn't work in an arrow function. This doesn't work inside an arrow function. This doesn't work inside an arrow function. So it goes outer bound, which is nothing but arrow is one such a function where it goes outer bound, where it is present inside say hi. Where inside say hi, it is not present. So it goes outer of this context and we'll get this details. And we'll get these details. So that's a special feature of arrow functions where it is useful when we actually do not want to have separate this keyword, but rather to take it from the outer context. So this to find out what value should we fit here in this given particular keyword, the arrow function let this keyword to search. It search for this entire say hi function. Initially it search for inside this arrow function, then it search for entire say hi function, then it goes to outer context and go for it. So similarly, if I have this thing known as let first name is equal to some random thing. Now you can clearly observe it's still going to this Nitin because this doesn't work here. So it directly goes to this outer context and we'll get the things and we'll get the things and we'll get the things. So that's how the thing actually work. That's how the this actually work specifically in the context of the respective arrow functions altogether. So that's it for this respective session. This is all about the thing that we want to understand about the keyword known as this. We'll meet in next session. Thank you all.